Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everyone. Carter Froelich, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. And today I'm really excited to welcome Reick Severance to the podcast. For those of you who may not know Reick currently serves as the division president for the 11,000-acre Wellen Park Master Plan community located in Venice, Florida. Just in case you want to know how well Wellen's doing, it's number 13 of the top 50 selling master plans in the country as ranked by RC Elco. Prior to this, Reick served in the same capacity for Kitson Partners Babcock Ranch, which is number 8 on the top 50 as recorded by RC Elco. He's also was the COO for New Vector Limited and the Senior Vice President of Development Strategy for the St. Joe Company, which is known for its watercolor project, which I'm going to talk to Reick a little bit about. And prior to this, the president of Seaside Development. And the reason that we've got Reick on today is because we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. Even though I'm a finance guy, I love architecture and I love urban planning. And we are going to be talking to Reick today about placemaking. So Reick, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here today.
Glad to be here. And thank you so much for including me.
And Reick, before we get started, maybe you could give the listeners just a little bit of background on you and what got you involved in master plan development and more importantly, you're one of the top experts, at least in my book, as it relates to placemaking.
Well, thank you very much. Ask me, how do you couch what you do? I say, I'm a placemaker at heart, but I'm also a bit of a Army knife. And I'll explain that a little bit because master plan development is really a kit of parts. It's not just one thing or another. I grew up in the hospitality side of the business. My parents had large format contracts with the Super Bowl and NASCAR tracks and the Gillette Stadium and those kinds of things. And I really felt like I always wanted to be in the hotel side of that. My parents had modest interest in that. So long and short, I went to Florida State. I was a diver. I was on scholarship there, specifically to go into the business school, but I wanted to be a general manager of a large resort. That's kind of what where my heart was. I worked for Hyatt Hotels and Resorts for a number of years. And then I jumped and went to Ernst & Young as a strategy consultant on the hospitality side, which quickly turned into second home resort development. I actually was on the team that did the original work for the Watercolor Inn before watercolor was anything.
Yeah.
Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, and I had gone to Seaside. As a consultant, I always went where the clients were. Seaside actually was a client of mine, and I was their interim COO for I think 2 years before I took the job full time. And then from that point on, the game is, as they say, has been played.
Yeah. And thanks for that background. And as it relates to placemaking, I went to ULI and in preparation for this and said, what does ULI describe placemaking as? And so I'm going to read their definition. Placemaking is a comprehensive community development approach that intentionally embeds art, culture, community engaged design into strategies to revitalize and stabilize communities. Sounds like a ULI definition. And now I'm going to turn it over. Reick, what is your definition of placemaking?
So I do think the ULI definition of placemaking is pretty close. It has all the hallmarks in there of what I think placemaking is. I would tell you, I see great places. The hub of them is the brand, and what are the stakeholders. And ironically, stakeholders don't always have a financial stake in the success. You've got civic, you've got education, you've got worship and spiritual aspects, but you also have that retail element, the mixed use consideration, recreation, and then lifestyle in general. And I would say probably for me, placemaking, the lifestyle umbrella sits over all of that because it touches every element within the within the wheel, so to speak. I'm a big believer, and I've shared this time and again. Placemaking is about creating the soul of a place, and some of that's intangible. You can't you can't pinpoint exactly where that is and why. It just is. And that's those lifestyle elements that make a place special. And, I noticed that at Seaside early on, things that we thought were just off turned out to be really great. The Airstream row, which is called the Land Yacht District, it was really because we had no capital. So to incubate businesses, you put land yachts, you put Airstream trailers, and then sure enough, 25 years later, they're still there. So really interesting things like that.
There's so many lessons, on Seaside, building one row at a time, to create that planned scarcity and, the lot prices and that is what really got me excited about placemaking and new urbanism or neo-traditional town planning, that type of thing, was Seaside, and then living in Corona del Mar and Balboa Island, which were very similar to Seaside. Rick, you've been involved in a lot of different projects throughout your career. Is there a difference when you're first coming into, say, for instance, a greenfield project, and how you're looking at placemaking, how you're going to create that soul of the place, versus when you're coming into a project that already has a start and they've begun to develop a sense of place? What is the difference as you come into the two different situations, and how do you approach each one?
Well, let me start with the ones that have had, bricks and mortar up, or a land plan that is progressing. A lot of times you are in the fix it mode. Based on your experience, they'll ask you to come in and say, okay, here's our land plan, and we're starting to do this. What do we need to tweak differently? So a lot of that is refining the edges. It's ensuring that, it's so funny, planners, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but planners sometimes forget that people have to use the restroom or park, or that there's garbage, right? And yet when a place is very vibrant and up and operational, those three things are really, really important. So sometimes it's solving problems or asking questions to get them to think differently about the built environment. And I would tell you, I did that a lot early on based on Seaside's experience and success, and the things I learned there, which were unbelievable from the Davis family. I was able to translate those to those developments where I was brought in and things were, either half baked or they were up and operational, but they couldn't be profitable. So that's the way I would handle when I inherited a plan, if you will. A greenfield site's, I would say, similar in that you take anything you had skinned your knees on in the past, or things you wish you had done differently, and you try to integrate those, especially in the charrette process. I'm a big believer where I would put things on the board of, these are constraints, things that we've got to get these answered before we start putting pen to paper. And I would tell you, half that list has to do with things that I either inherited that I didn't like, or mistakes I had made that I wished I wouldn't have, or the environment had changed. There was no such thing as autonomous vehicles, or the mobility or access to, green initiatives and solar. So you had some of that where we didn't have it before. And then I would say unique considerations, like in Florida, which I referenced recently, we reoriented the downtown almost 28 degrees to take advantage of the breezes and the shade in the key months, heat months. I would never have known that unless I had inherited a plan where we hadn't spent that kind of time, and we were all like, oh, shoot, we don't have enough shade, and it's really affecting profitability.
Yeah. And I remember on Camana Bay, that was a real big issue, seeing if we could get the breeze coming through the pedestrian areas. Yeah.
You got it.
And so when you say you're inheriting a place, or you may be inheriting a project, and there may be an element of the placemaking that's not working, is that hardscape, softscape, programming, combination thereof? Which is easier to fix? I think I know the answer, but how do you approach it?
All of it is all of the above, for sure. It's all of the above. Hardscape is, of course, the most challenging, and but I would say recover quickly if you've made a mistake. Some people want to try to get the built environment and how people move and interact with one another. They want to force them into something that they know is not working because they're afraid of the expense to make that change. I would always say the return on investment long term, whether if it was a 7-year hold or a 30-year hold, would be make that change quickly to the hardscape and do what's right for the way people need to flow in the space, because it'll only generate more revenue dollars. I would say that, from a programming perspective, there is the tried and true things that work. Live music, period, always works, right? People just love live music. It's a given. I'm a big believer in the arts and layering in both visual performance arts, but we also have things like community murals where they paint individual areas on a mural that comes to life over the course of a week or 2 weeks. So I think experiential things, and what I found is experiential programming is multi-generational. That's a lot of words, but the truth is, if there's a certain demographic, I'm in that demographic of 55 plus, that wants a purpose. They still want to do something. They want to add value. So sometimes creating things for even 30 people, not 300 or 3,000, are really important. Those sometimes are educational and related. And then there are things you just want to make sure you can bring the grandkids to.
Yeah.
Right? Or your kids to. And so we try to create programming that runs the gamut. And then I reference this also. I think wellness and well-being is about fitness and recreation. And I think we're in a situation where there are blue zones, which I think we could qualify for. If you create an environment where you can get people outside to interact with one another, that's also a great equalizer, regardless of how much your house costs, or if you're living in a rental unit versus a $2 million estate home.
Yeah. And I know that when we first got started in the development business, the developers were building a golf course or multiple golf courses, and it was all about view premiums, right, on an open space. Then they may throw some trails in, and then they'd have a fitness center. Well, we've really gotten away from that, and I know at Wellen Park you've got a very vibrant downtown. Let me ask you a question. Do you need a downtown or the semblance of a downtown to start creating that sense of place? And if you have a site that lends itself to that type of thing, how much of the downtown do you have to build to start to be able to give a sense of place, community, and how much is necessary to activate that area, if that makes sense?
No, it does. And you may have to remind me the balance of the question, but I will
Yeah.
say, we need a downtown. The short answer is no. We needed a downtown because there wasn't a there. There was no Main and High. In Northport / Venice, there wasn't a common place to bring everyone together. And we had a couple of very successful neighborhoods but there was no connectivity. So the downtown created that great equalizer where you can either get a coffee or a yogurt or a glass of wine or a meal, and it didn't matter where you were on the economic spectrum to be able to enjoy a Wellen Park. So that's the one. I would say in terms of square footage, that's really a capital question, right? It's, do you want to spend the money that you would spend on a golf course to try to create that sense of place, but then it's exclusive and knowing, there's a barrier of entry? We chose not to spend as much as you would spend on a golf course, but pretty close. I would say you can do a lot with phasing. So based on where the capital is, creating incubated spaces that still act as event hubs, you can create temporary stages to do festivals and events and food trucks and, play facilities. And you can be very creative with getting partners that are willing to be there, and we'll call it even on percentage rent only. Mm-hmm. So you're not charging them at a base rate. You're just getting an incubator there to give them the legs as well to prove out, proof of concept. So that was the second part. And then the third part was, how much do you need in terms of making downtown successful? Yeah. Okay, good. I did it. I was asked that question recently, and I don't think there's algebra to that. Yeah. I think when you do the studies and you look at the radius, you have to look at the supply that's around you and making sure you fill that gap. And so I don't know exactly what the square footage is. I would say start small, have it super successful, augment with things that are temporary, create an incubated environment, and then you can always do bricks and sticks after you've created that. It becomes the place to be.
Yeah. And when you're doing this kind of development where you're deciding, for lack of a better term, our downtown, if you will be our amenity. Our social space will be our amenity rather than the golf course or something else. Is that typically subsidized? Are you bringing in an operator? Is the developer doing that themselves? Are they giving them free rent plus the subsidy until there's enough critical mass to make the endeavor, be that a restaurant, a coffee shop, a dry cleaner, yogurt shop, whatever that tends to be? What have you seen in your experience?
I've never subsidized.
Okay.
In certain markets, you didn't have to. I would say Babcock was a different situation because there was no there. There were no rooftops anywhere. And
Yeah.
that would be within 6 miles. So we ran the commercial interest, which was the restaurant and the market, right? And the juice bar. And we ran those as our own operating business unit. So there was definitely a subsidy for a period of time. I would tell you when we did some of the healthy life center deals, we backstopped I believe net operating losses up to a certain point for the first 3 years, though I don't think they needed it after the first year and a half.
Wow.
So Babcock was a little bit different story because it was 100% greenfield and there were no rooftops anywhere. So that intention was to create the there, and then had to run it as your own operating business. But everywhere else I've been, we haven't needed to.
That's really interesting because I from my past experience, and at least with some of the walkable, denser, new urbanist type communities where they've started with the downtown, they brought in the grocer, for instance, because there was no grocer and they were subsidizing, for a period of time until they had enough rooftops to cut it loose. Yeah,
that's exactly what we did at Babcock. So we created the grocer, which was the town store, if you will, where you can get everything from a bottle of wine to a jug of milk and a pizza, if you will. That was definitely subsidized out of the gate. But in all the other communities, you may be tiering rates. You may create a low rate for your first, term, if you will, or you may be a little bit more aggressive on giving them tenant improvement allocations just to make sure they can, they can do the fit out that you'd be proud of. But no, I think if you're able to sell the vision and you can show the demand, you don't really need to do that, in my opinion. Again, greenfield sites are a little bit different.
Yeah. As I indicated previously, I became really interested in new urbanism and placemaking when I lived on a place called Balboa Island, and it was very dense, had a little downtown. But the way that the houses were lined up to the streets, the fact that it was walkable, I mean, forget about that, it was on an island, but that alone, the architecture and the planning created the sense of place. How do you look at architecture, your planning guidelines when you're working with the master plan community or not, as the case may be, to help also create the sense of place, not necessarily as a social place, to be, but as kind of an ongoing activity, meaning I'm just going to be walking down the street and have the ability to interact with people. I mean, is that even a consideration, when you're
sure it is, especially if you define yourself as a new urban community, right? And Mattamy Corporate is doing a new project called Newfield on the other coast. And when we're going through the architecture there, it's really important to stay true to what the hallmark was, which is front porches or front and side porches on corners, and having the expression to the street. And that setback is intimate enough where you can wave to your neighbor or invite him up on the porch for a glass of wine. I mean, that's really important. It's actually part of the engagement. I would say with Wellen Park at 11,000 acres, it's got to be done in other ways. Each individual neighborhood has their own amenity, and so you're being specific there. I would tell you, our new urban core will be the higher density around the downtown. That's where we're going to be layering in product like the Missing Middle, which is a really interesting product that Dan Froelich, he and I worked together back in Seaside, he's doing, and we're layering that into the downtown and just creating a little bit better sense of scale and walkability based on its proximity to the downtown. But the further you get away, you're going to see a more traditional land plan.
Yeah. So it's easier, I would think, to create place when you're more dense.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or it's not just dense, it's land constrained, right?
Yeah.
When you yes, we all know it's more expensive to do an alley loaded, street than not. But when you got to get the density on the site and you want to take advantage of the attributes of the site, that alley loaded product can do that for you. But you still have to have great architecture. I will say too, every one of the national builders, as well as the regionals and related, have something in their arsenal that's alley loaded with a porch.
Yeah.
Now it may not be on a pedestal, right? But it's got a porch to it. And then you can always push and say, a 30-year elevations have to have front porches, which I've done in the past. So, and the models have to have porches. So you can create the sense by dictating and mandating, even with the national builders, this is what I'm looking for. So this is what we want to see.
Yeah. And as you look around and obviously you see a lot of master plans, you've seen a lot of master plans. What is it that developers, in your opinion, miss the mark on as it relates to creating place? And here again, you don't have to point anybody out, but just kind of curious.
I think they forget that they're servicing multiple layers of customer. And the Echo Demo profile. So it was really interesting, and I'll just go back because it's easier. But when Seaside's average sales price, let's call it $2.5–3 million, and that's years ago, right? So you automatically make an assumption as to who your customer is. Well, that customer or the renter may be only there 2 weeks a year. The truth is the people who are visiting Seaside were coming 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. Well, when you add all the revenue that they were spending or generating from all their visits up against the other group, so sometimes you can't take yourselves too seriously and say we only, cater to a certain demographic profile, when in reality, if you're open, you need to make sure you have both programming and price points that can accommodate everyone. I would say I've made that mistake. I've thought about what my radius was and really didn't take into account what we'll call the visitor revenue.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh no, absolutely. Absolutely. And how have things, and you touched on this a little bit, but how has placemaking evolved over the years? I mean, you talk about health and wellness, you talk about multi-generational. Where have things moved from to, and where do you think they might be going as it relates to the next 10, 15 years? Dusting off the old crystal ball. And I know that at Ernst & Young, they gave us each one of those.
That's right. Didn't they? At least that's what we told our clients. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
The hallmarks of placemaking, though I didn't know it was called that. Robert and Daryl Davis at Seaside and Andreas, and they created the right incubator to test what was going to work and what wasn't, even when there wasn't demand around it, right? And again, I touched on people want to have a purpose. They want to have experience. They want to be around others. Even if they like a age-restricted neighborhood, qualified neighborhood, we call it, they still want to be around others and other generations. They may just not want to share the pool with them, right? They don't want to hear kids play in the pool. But people want to be around other people. And creating an environment for them to do that, whether that's the streetscape and you have the outdoor seating that spills out onto the Paseo and people get to see others interacting. And, we've done this in Europe. They've done this in Europe for hundreds of years. The Paseo is actually the best. That's the best table, not inside, right? Yeah. So if you use those same critical elements in design to create the right environment for there to be purpose, interaction. It is about engaging with the street and the things that are going on around it. I think that is the basis for placemaking. Where is it going? I actually feel like it's almost come full circle in some instances. We got very insular. I think COVID didn't help us at all, of course. I think everyone's married to their phones in a way. We've just done something recently where we're using the phone because we want it to be multi-generational. So we have QR codes and hidden. They're kind of hidden. It's almost like it's a museum. You got to go find them. And when you scan the QR code, augmented reality comes to life. And we have 7 spots where we have a huge mural. It's 2 stories high that comes to life with the heron, and we have fish jumping out of the water, and we have lights that turn into illuminary bags that go up into the sky and stuff. And if you go through and you get to scan all those, you get to get a free coffee or a free ice cream. We want people to try to experience technology where it becomes part of the fun instead of kind of an impediment or a distraction, because I do feel like we're all in a situation these days where your phone and your kid's phone and your grandkid's phone can be, or their tablet can be a distraction.
Yeah, where they're not leaving the house at all. Here they're getting out.
They're getting
they
out.
may be looking at their phone, but they're bumping into others doing the same thing, having conversations and going to get a cup of coffee. Yeah.
We've even created, user-based content where we have photo contests. We have capture this image, and we're getting as many high school students submitting for those as we are, professional photographers, which I think is amazing,
And just last week, I interviewed Tom Wolliver of Oxland Group in Texas, and he's working on a couple large master plans. And we were talking about amenities. What are your amenities? And he said, all my amenities are meant to drive experience and connection, meaning people coming together. And it could be a 2x4 bandstand, or,
right.
But as long as there's somebody playing music, people are going to come and congregate, and nothing is more interesting to people than people, right? At the end of the day, and having that experience.
And they want to feel included. They want to feel part of something, and I think technology's driven us further away because it's easy to do that. We think we're connected, but Facebook friends aren't really connections. Not really, so I would tell you some of those experiences become almost religious in nature, in that you have to be at the Tuesday night, tailgate. You have to go to the Friday night concerts to see your friends and let the kids play. And so I like those aspects of it. I also think that the consumer, which is the visitor, the resident, the tenant even, they should also help populate what the experiences need to be. We want to be good listeners because their customers tell them, hey, I wish we had live music. I'm making that up. Or I wish we had XYZ. Or the music's too loud on Friday nights. It could be any of those things. I've got to be a good listener to make sure that we're hearing from the ground floor a bit.
Yeah. Then, you mentioned technology, and you talked a little bit about mobility and autonomous vehicles, and we can talk about that. But how are you informing the community of everything that's going on, what's available, what they may be interested in? And then I know we were talking with the Morrissey family of the villages, and they said, we've got 300 different clubs. I didn't even know there could be 300 different things to be a club member of, but they just have, 3 or 4 people. We're going to start a robin bird watching, that's all we're going to look for are robins, but how do you build community with the technology and informing? I think I know where this is going to go, but I'm just curious how you link with the social.
With technology. I think, how do we communicate with the residents? So we have a really high adoption rate in terms of email communication, and it's no different than your newsletter, your flyer. We have the Allisant app, which rolls out at the end of next month, which is I think it's got a 7% uptake rate. So, and it's very curated so that I'm a fitness guy. Most of the push notifications will be fitness oriented. I'm not a gardener, so I won't be getting those. Allisant customizes that through their algorithms. So I think that's another way people can get information. It's also not intimidating. And my parents are 78, 82, something like that. And they will my mom will absolutely look at the Facebook friends page to get a good understanding of events and new information. So I think you give them enough with the social media aspects, and then an app-based platform that's 100% theirs that they can integrate with when they need to. That's the best way. I would say we still do town hall meetings. And people think that's crazy. We're doing new resident meetings to do onboarding, and they have to be invitation. They have to be a new resident because it's important. We're trying to get some of that messaging out. So on the technology front, We also have our welcome center, which we don't sell out of there. We refer. It's kind of, we share the fat part of the funnel in terms of Wellen Park as a community, and then we refer to builders and neighborhoods. It's still the place for intel. I can't tell you how many people come in to get a cup of coffee and then we'll ask the ambassadors questions about, hey, I heard this. When is Costco coming? The hospital start construction. How long do you think it's going to be? So there's that, what I call that like sidewalk marketing or the bus stop where, you play that game, you get information from your friends. So we've got some of that also. The connectivity part of we'll call it autonomous vehicles. And, having been a beta area for autonomous vehicles with Babcock for years, I think I'm a big fan. I think you have to have destination to destination. So for us, the natural logical loop, closed loop would be the Brave Stadium to the downtown and maybe the community garden. Is a reason to get, you can only have to park once. So to me, that's where it's checked the box. It's easy. It's got to get faster. It's still slow. It's not really autonomous. There's somebody in the vehicle and everyone forgets that. I think we have to solve the first mile, last mile. Because at the end of the day, if I have a golf cart, which is electric anyway, my wife's going to want to go when she wants to go. She may not want to look at the app and wait for 15 minutes. Some people will, for sure. And I'm a big fan of it. And, I think even for school age children, getting them to and from school from their neighborhoods. But that first mile, last mile is one that's going to be a challenge unless we can get to this customized platform where the Severance is call the autonomous vehicle to my house to take me to the restaurant, like an Uber. I think once we can get there, and then it probably has a higher interest rate for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. What has been the most interesting or surprising experience you may have had as it relates to placemaking? Something that worked that you didn't necessarily, you were a little questioning about, but turned out to be a huge hit.
It's a fantastic question. We started a black box theater in Seaside, and Craig Hoover, who I'm still friends with today, had just graduated from college and he was an actor, and his mother lived in Seaside full time. And he was adamant about starting the Seaside Repertory Theater, which is a black box theater that during Fridays and Saturday nights, they went out to the colleges and they recruited talent. They gave them accommodations, I think, but they performed for free. They did 2 shows during the summer, and then they did improv at night. And then they did which I always wanted to do, a children's theater, outdoor children's theater every Tuesday night. And I would tell you it changed the game because people would come 30 miles in either direction to come to the children's theater and or the repertory theater because there wasn't that there, right? I mean, I'm in markets now where the arts is phenomenal, so you don't have that issue. But I think I was probably proud that we supported he couldn't have been 23, maybe 24.
Wow, that's amazing.
And there wasn't a huge capital investment. We had the space, you know what I mean? It was flexible use of a space 3 months a year that would have otherwise been kind of dead space, I think that's probably one of them. And no one's ever asked me that question before, by the way, Carter.
Oh, well.
No, I really appreciate that.
No, that's really cool.
First one that came to mind. That's a few years ago, but I think I think Robert Davis would say the same thing. He was probably really proud of that decision.
Yeah, that's neat. And then how about the flip side? Something you thought for sure was a home run. This is a no-brainer. We're going to do it. And it didn't work out as you expected, or it wasn't adapted by the community.
I would say, I don't know if my client would agree, but I think at Camana Bay, the aesthetic is so gorgeous. And I mean, stunning, like laser cut, light fixtures to throw gobos on the ground. And I mean, it was just stunning. And the intent was always to create this environment for the entire island. And I think right out of the gate, it was so good looking that I think it created a barrier of entry.
Yeah.
And also, I believe that the merchant mix out of the gate, we went really higher end. We brought in, Michael's Genuine and stuff from Miami, some real Martinique and stuff. I think maybe there was a disconnect in terms of those price points versus what I referenced earlier. Those people that were visiting all the time, maybe there wasn't necessarily a restaurant for them early on. And that was, we created a bar that was so high and everyone was so proud of it. But in reality, could it really accommodate the masses in terms of the retail? I think looking back on it now, Mark and Jackie and everyone else would say they got there. But I think right out of the gate, maybe we didn't.
Well, and I know when we were originally kind of planning that, the idea was to try to bring in people of the island, right? On island, the hamburger guy, hey, we're going to stick him in Camana Bay. And it sounds like it didn't work.
Well, I think it was just a disconnect. They had so much excitement and interest because it was so physically beautiful, like stunning.
Yeah.
But it was so stunning that maybe, that merchant didn't necessarily fit with the physical space. The hamburger guy wasn't, So I think that now they've worked through all that. I've been back since, obviously, but I think that was just one of those, how do you get maybe good to great, right?
Yeah.
In that environment.
Well, that's great. I'm anxious to get back there and see Mark and Jim and team, and it's been a long time. Well, Rick, thanks for your time. I don't want to take all of your day up today, but we're going to have another conversation because I'd really like to talk to you more about some of our shared experiences. But is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't related to placemaking that you'd just like to share with the listeners?
I would say placemaking doesn't happen without a team. And ironically, sometimes people think that team is just marketing and the land planning guys, and it isn't. It's, the guy doing the landscaping who has an idea. It's the finance guys saying, hey, I think we can get more return if we do this versus this. How important is that to you? I would say, the collaborative is always better. And so you got to be a good listener and not be afraid. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. Depending on what role you have, it doesn't matter. If you're invited to the table in the room and you're a junior planner and you just don't get it, you don't buy what they're selling, you gotta raise your hand. You have to create an environment where you're allowing people to add value to the overall vision and of what placemaking can be, or experiential, wherever that experience is for them. But be a good listener. Just because you've done it before doesn't mean you have all the answers. So I would say that's key. Be a great listener to new ideas, because you only have what's in your tool belt. You haven't added any additional tools yet. So let some other people help you with that.
Oh, that's great advice. Great advice. Well, everybody, that concludes today's episode of Land to Lots. I'd like to thank Rick Severance for your participation today, Rick. And I will be adding all of Rick's contact information to our show notes, should you care to reach out and discuss placemaking with Rick. And if you find this podcast interesting and of value, we encourage you to share it with your friends and subscribe to Land to Lots podcast. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.